"Don't touch that," she screamed, lunging. Too late. The flight attendant, eyes glittering with righteous fury, snatched the laptop, like it was evidence, like Brianna was some common thief. Rage coiled in Brianna's gut, hotter than the humiliation. They thought they were teaching her a lesson, these entitled first-class passengers and their power-tripping servants. They saw a hoodie, not the glint of genius. What they didn't know. This wasn't just some stolen gadget. It was her life's work, encrypted, unbreakable. And her dad, he wasn't just going to file a complaint, he was going to buy the whole damn airline. This is the story of how one judgmental crew made the biggest mistake of their lives, and the brutal karma that followed. The chaos started quietly, as most disasters do. Flight 409 from New York to London was boarding. It was a flagship route, the kind of flight where the first-class cabin wasn't just seats. It was individual suites with sliding privacy doors, heated leather, and champagne poured before the wheels even moved. Brianna Clark adjusted her oversized grey hoodie, pulling it slightly further over her forehead. She was exhausted. She had just finished a 6-week intensive coding boot camp in Silicon Valley and was flying to London to meet her father for a much-needed vacation. She wasn't dressed for the part of a first-class passenger. She wore faded joggers, scuffed sneakers, and had a pair of large noise-cancelling headphones resting around her neck. She found seat 1A, the prime spot. She dropped her backpack, which looked like a standard school bag but contained about $30,000 worth of custom hardware, onto the floor. She sat down, exhaling a long breath, and immediately pulled out her laptop. It was a prototype model, unreleased, with no logo on the lid, just a sleek matte black finish. She didn't notice the eyes on her at first. 2 rows back, Mrs. Eleanor Higgins was settling into seat 2F. Eleanor was the type of woman who wore her wealth like armor. Heavy gold jewelry, a scarf that cost more than a Honda Civic, and an expression that smelled something bad permanently. She was traveling with her husband, Robert, who was currently arguing with a gate agent about his luggage. Eleanor scanned the cabin, her eyes landing on Brianna. She squinted. A black teenager in a hoodie sitting in the most expensive seat on the plane. Eleanor scoffed audibly, unbuckling her seatbelt and leaning into the aisle to flag down a flight attendant. The flight attendant, Brenda, was already having a bad day. The flight was overbooked, catering was late, and her seniority review was coming up. She plastered on a tight, practiced smile as she approached Eleanor. "Can I get you some champagne, Mrs. Higgins?" Brenda asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "No, you can't," Eleanor snapped, pointing a manicured finger toward the front of the cabin. "You can explain to me why there is an unaccompanied minor, looking like a street urchin, I might add, sitting in seat 1A. My husband wanted that seat. The booking agent said it was taken by a VIP." Brenda looked toward 1A. She saw the hoodie. She saw the sneakers. She saw the teenager typing furiously on a strange-looking laptop. Brenda frowned. She checked her manifest. Seat 1A was listed under the name B. Clark. No honorific, no frequent flyer status listed on the quick view tablet she held. Just a name. "I'm sure it's just a mistake, Mrs. Higgins," Brenda said, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sometimes economy passengers sneak up here, hoping we won't notice before takeoff. I'll handle it." "See that you do," Eleanor huffed, crossing her arms. "It degrades the experience for the rest of us." Brenda straightened her blazer and marched towards seat 1A. She didn't approach with the deferential politeness reserved for paying customers. She approached with the authority of a school principal catching a student in the hallway without a pass. "Excuse me," Brenda said loudly, looming over Brianna. Brianna didn't hear her. She was deep in a line of code, her headphones cancelling out the ambient noise of the cabin. Brenda tapped Brianna's shoulder hard. Brianna jumped, startled, and pulled her headphones down. "Oh, sorry. Did I miss the safety briefing?" Her voice was soft, polite, articulate. "Let me see your boarding pass," Brenda demanded, hand outspread. "No, please." "No, ma'am." Brianna blinked, confused by the aggression. Sure, it's on my phone." She dug into her pocket, unlocked her phone, and held up the QR code. Brenda snatched the phone from her hand, scanning it with her eyes rather than the machine. Seat 1A, B. Clark. It looked legitimate, but Brenda's bias was already writing a different story. This is a digital pass, Brenda said skeptically. Anyone can Photoshop these. Where is your physical ticket? I didn't print one, Brianna said, reaching for her phone back. I used the app. Look, if you scan it, it'll show up. I don't need to scan it to know you're in the wrong seat, Brenda said, her voice raising enough that other passengers were now watching. Eleanor Higgins was craning her neck, a smirk playing on her lips. This cabin costs $12,000 a seat, young lady. Did your parents buy this for you? Brianna stiffened. She knew this tone. She knew this look. My father purchased the ticket, yes. Is there a problem? The problem, Brenda said, crossing her arms, is that we have a wait list of actual paying customers, and I suspect you've either used a stolen credit card or you're a staff dependent who bumped themselves up illegally. I'm going to need you to gather your things and move to economy while we sort this out. Brianna felt the heat rise in her cheeks. I'm not moving. I have a valid ticket. Scan it. I am not going to argue with a child, Brenda snapped. Move, now, or I'll have security escort you off. Then get security, Brianna said, her voice shaking slightly, but her chin held high. Because I'm not moving. The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to choke on. The other passengers were pretending to read their magazines, but every ear was tuned to the confrontation in 1A. Brenda turned red. Being defied by a teenager in front of VIPs was not part of the plan. She turned and marched back to the galley, grabbing the interphone. She didn't call the police, not yet. She called the purser, a man named Gary. Gary was a stickler for rules, but he was also lazy. He walked up the aisle, wiping his hands on a napkin. What's the issue, Brenda? She refuses to move. She's belligerent, Brenda lied, pointing at Brianna. And Gary, look at that laptop. Gary looked. Brianna had closed the lid, but the device looked industrial, high-tech, and decidedly unlike a consumer MacBook or Dell. So, Gary asked, Mrs. Higgins in 2F says she saw that girl lurking near the lounge earlier. Brenda improvised, her voice low. She thinks the girl swiped that laptop from a businessman in the terminal. That's probably how she hacked the ticket app. It was a ridiculous leap in logic, a fabrication built on nothing but prejudice, but Gary looked at the hoodie, then at Eleanor Higgins, who gave him a solemn nod of confirmation and made up his mind. Gary approached Brianna. He was larger, more imposing. Miss, Gary said, his voice booming, we have reason to believe you are in possession of stolen property and are flying on a fraudulent ticket. We are currently at the gate. You have two choices. You walk off this plane on your own legs, or we drag you off. Brianna's hands were trembling. She gripped the armrests. This is harassment. I want to speak to the pilot. I want to call my dad. You're not calling anyone, Brenda interjected, reaching down and grabbing the laptop from Brianna's tray table. Hey, don't touch that, Brianna screamed, lunging forward to grab her property. That laptop contained the only copy of her final project. Months of work encrypted with biometric keys only she could access. Assault, Brenda shrieked, jumping back and clutching the laptop to her chest. She attacked me. She just attacked a flight crew member. It was a lie. Brianna had barely brushed Brenda's sleeve. But on an airplane, the word of the crew is law. Gary didn't hesitate. He pulled a pair of heavy-duty plastic zip-tie restraints from his pocket. Standard issue for unruly passengers. He lunged at Brianna. Get off me, Brianna cried, struggling as Gary twisted her arm behind her back. She was small, only 5'4", and Gary was a heavy man. He shoved her face against the plush leather of the seat she had rightfully paid for. Stop resisting, Gary yelled, playing to the audience. You're hurting me, Brianna sobbed, the humiliation burning hotter than the pain in her shoulder. Within seconds, her wrists were bound tight behind her back. Gary hauled her up by her arm, dragging her out of the seat. Sit there, Gary shoved her into the jump seat near the cockpit door, buckling her in aggressively. And don't you say a word. Brenda stood in the aisle, holding the black laptop up. I'll act as witness, Gary. She tried to strike me when I confiscated the stolen item. Eleanor Higgins clapped slowly from seat 2F. Bravo. Finally, some safety on this airline. Good riddance. Brianna sat in the jump seat, tears blurring her vision. She couldn't wipe them away because her hands were bound. She felt utterly powerless. She watched as Brenda walked back to the galley, placing the laptop on the counter like a trophy. I need to make a call, Brianna whispered, her voice broken. Please, just let me call my father. Your father can pick you up from airport jail, Brenda sneered. Captain is calling the authorities. We're going back to the gate to hand you over. The plane, which had begun to push back during the altercation, shuddered to a halt. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the delay. We have a security incident on board and will be returning to the gate to have law enforcement remove a passenger. Please remain seated. Brianna closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. They thought she was a criminal. They thought she was nobody. She looked at Brenda, who was busy chatting with Eleanor, the two of them laughing about kids these days. You have no idea, Brianna thought. You have absolutely no idea what you've just done. The plane docked. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Security is on the way, Gary said, standing over Brianna. Actually, Brianna said, her voice suddenly steady, cold, and razor-sharp. She looked Gary dead in the eye. I don't think it's security. Excuse me, Gary frowned. My watch, Brianna nodded her head toward her wrist, which was currently bound behind her back. It has a distress beacon. I triggered it the moment you touched me. It sends a priority alert to my emergency contact with my GPS location and an audio recording of the last 5 minutes. Gary laughed. A distress beacon? Who is your daddy, James Bond? No, Brianna said calmly. But he is the man who just bought the controlling stake in this airline's parent company this morning, and if I'm not mistaken... She looked out the porthole window of the exit door. A fleet of black SUVs had just swarmed the tarmac, surrounding the plane. They weren't police cars, they were private security. And leading them, marching up the stairs to the jet bridge with a face like thunder, was a tall man in a bespoke suit. He's here, Brianna whispered. The cabin door flew open. It wasn't the airport police. It was Raymond Clark, and he didn't look like he was there to negotiate. The silence that fell over the first-class cabin was heavy, suffocating. The air conditioning hummed, but it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Gary, the burly purser who had just manhandled a teenage girl into zip ties, stood in the aisle, his chest heaving slightly from the exertion. He looked toward the open cabin door, expecting 2 airport police officers to shuffle in with clipboards. Instead, a man in a charcoal 3-piece suit stepped onto the plane. Raymond Clark was 6'3", built like a linebacker who had pivoted to corporate warfare. He didn't just walk, he occupied space. He radiated a terrifying cold energy that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Behind him were not police officers, but 3 men in tactical suits with private security emblazoned on their vests, earpieces coiled tight against their necks. Gary blinked. Excuse me? This is a restricted area. Sir, you need to step back to the terminal. Raymond didn't even look at Gary. It was as if Gary was a piece of furniture, a particularly ugly, irrelevant piece of furniture. Raymond's dark eyes scanned the cabin, bypassing the gaping mouth of Eleanor Higgins in 2F, bypassing the frozen Brenda holding the laptop. His eyes locked onto the jump seat near the cockpit. He saw Brianna. He saw the tears tracking through the dust on her cheek. And then he saw her hands. The moment Raymond saw the plastic zip ties binding his daughter's wrists, the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. His jaw muscle feathered once, a small, dangerous tick that Brianna knew meant scorched earth. Daddy, Brianna choked out, the single word cracking the silence. Raymond moved. He didn't run, but he crossed the distance in 2 long strides. Sir, you cannot approach the prisoner, Gary shouted, stepping in Raymond's path, putting a hand on Raymond's chest to stop him. It was the last mistake Gary would make as a free man. One of the security guards behind Raymond moved with blurred speed. He grabbed Gary's wrist, twisted it with precise, agonizing pressure, and shoved the purser against the galley wall. Do not touch Mr. Clark, the guard growled. Raymond ignored the scuffle entirely. He knelt in front of Brianna. His face, usually a mask of corporate stoicism, softened into pure heartbreak. Bree, are you hurt? My shoulder, Brianna whispered, sniffing. He twisted it, and the ties are too tight. My hands are numb. Raymond's eyes shifted to the zip ties cutting into her skin. He reached into his pocket, produced a small silver penknife, and sliced the plastic with surgical precision. Brianna's arms fell forward. She groaned as the blood rushed back into her hands. Raymond gently took her wrists, inspecting the angry red welts forming there. He turned her hands over, checking for broken skin. Then he stood up. He turned slowly to face the cabin. The softness was gone. The heartbreak was gone. In its place was a look of such concentrated fury that Brenda, still holding the laptop, actually took a step back. "Who did this?" Raymond asked. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low baritone rumble, deadly quiet. "I want the name of the person who put hands on my daughter." Gary was still pinned against the wall by the security guard, gasping. She's a security threat. She refused to move. She's flying on a fraudulent ticket." Brenda found her voice, though it was shrill and shaking. "Sir, you are interfering with a federal flight crew. That girl is a thief. She stole that laptop." Brenda held up the black computer like a shield. "We were just following protocol." Raymond looked at Brenda. He looked at the laptop. A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. "A thief," Raymond repeated. "Yes." Eleanor Higgins piped up from seat 2F, unable to keep quiet. She adjusted her silk scarf, trying to project authority. "I saw her. She looks like a vagrant. She doesn't belong in first class. These attendants are heroes for protecting us, and frankly, your intrusion is delaying our flight to London." Raymond looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Higgins, is it?" Eleanor blinked, surprised he knew her name. "Yes, and my husband, Robert." "Robert Higgins," Raymond said, his mind accessing a mental database. "CEO of Higgins Logistics. You're currently negotiating a shipping contract with Clark Global Industries for your European distribution." Robert Higgins, who had been trying to remain invisible in seat 2E, turned pale. He sat up straight. "Wait, Clark? As in, Raymond Clark?" "I am Raymond Clark," Raymond said, buttoning his suit jacket. "And as of 8 a.m. this morning, my holding company, Clark Global, finalized the acquisition of Sovereign Airlines. I own this plane. I own the fuel in the wings. I own the gate we are parked at." He turned his gaze back to Brenda and Gary. "And," Raymond continued, his voice hardening like concrete, "I certainly own the laptop you are currently holding, which contains the proprietary source code for my company's next billion-dollar AI merger. Code that my daughter wrote." Brenda's hands went slack. The laptop slipped from her fingers. Before it could hit the floor, Raymond caught it with one hand. "Oops," Raymond whispered. "Careful with my property. That's a felony." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from confusion to absolute terror. Brenda looked at Gary. Gary looked at the floor. The realization was crashing down on them like a tidal wave. They hadn't just profiled a random teenager, they had assaulted the daughter of their new boss. This is a misunderstanding," Brenda stammered, her face draining of color. "Sir, Mr. Clark, the manifest, it just said B. Clark. It didn't say VIP. She was dressed in... Well, look at her." "I am looking at her," Raymond said, stepping closer to Brenda. "I see a 17-year-old girl dressed for comfort on a 10-hour flight. I see a brilliant honor student. What I don't see is a reason for you to treat her like a criminal." "She refused to show her ticket," Gary yelled from the wall, trying to salvage the narrative. "She was belligerent." "Brianna," Raymond said, not looking away from Brenda. "Phone." Brianna, rubbing her sore wrists, handed her father her phone. Raymond tapped the screen, bringing up the boarding pass. He held it inches from Brenda's face. "Seat 1A," Raymond read. "Full fare, purchased via the corporate account. Validated." The scanner wouldn't have worked," Brenda lied desperately. "We thought it was a screenshot." "Did you try to scan it?" Raymond asked. "Well, no," Brenda admitted, her voice trembling, "but Mrs. Higgins said—" "I don't care what Mrs. Higgins said," Raymond snapped, his voice finally rising, cracking like a whip. "I pay you to follow protocol, not the whims of a prejudiced passenger." He turned to the rest of the cabin. "This flight is cancelled." Gasps erupted. "You can't do that," Eleanor Higgins shrieked. "We have meetings. We have vacations." "This plane is now a crime scene," Raymond announced calmly. "My security team has already contacted the local police department. Not the airport security you called, Gary, the real police. Because what happened here wasn't a security incident. It was assault. It was false imprisonment. And it was theft. He pointed to the security guard holding Gary. "Bennett, bring him to the front. Brenda, sit in seat 1A. Since you wanted my daughter out of it so badly, you can sit there while we wait for the detectives." "Detectives," Brenda squeaked. Tears began to spill down her heavily make-upped face. "Mr. Clark, please, I have a family. I've been with this airline for 15 years. I was just trying to protect the cabin." "You profiled my daughter," Raymond said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You saw a black girl in a hoodie and decided she didn't belong. You didn't check her ticket. You didn't ask her name. You let a passenger's bias dictate your actions." Raymond walked over to Robert Higgins in seat 2E. Robert looked like he wanted to dissolve into the upholstery. "Robert," Raymond said cordially, "about that contract." "Raymond, please," Robert stammered, sweating. "My wife, Eleanor, she's old-fashioned. She didn't mean anything by it." "She called my daughter a street urchin and a thief," Raymond said, "and you sat there and let her. You watched a grown man twist a child's arm and said nothing." Raymond pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. "Yes, Mr. Clark," a voice answered. It was his chief legal officer. "Kill the Higgins logistics deal," Raymond said, staring Robert in the eye. "Done," the voice said instantly, "and send a memo to all our subsidiaries. Higgins Logistics is blacklisted. Any vendor who uses them loses our business." "Understood." Robert Higgins gasped, clutching his chest. "Raymond, that will bankrupt me. That's 60% of my revenue." "Karma is a bitch, Robert," Raymond said, hanging up. "And so is poverty. I suggest you get used to it. Maybe next time you'll teach your wife some manners." Eleanor Higgins began to sob loudly. "You monster! You can't do this." "I just did," Raymond said. He turned back to the crew. The police sirens were audible now, wailing across the tarmac. Blue and red lights began to flash against the interior cabin walls, painting the terrified faces of the crew in strobe light bursts of color. "Now," Raymond said, turning to Brianna, "let's talk about what really happened. Bree, open the laptop." Brianna sat in seat 1B, next to where Brenda was nervously weeping in 1A. Her wrists were bruising, dark purple marks forming against her skin. She opened the matte black laptop. "The system records everything," Brianna said, her voice raspy. "It's a security feature I wrote. If the gyroscope detects a struggle or sudden impact, it starts a rolling buffer recording of the ambient audio and activates the webcam." She typed in a complex string of commands. A waveform appeared on the screen. "This is from 10 minutes ago," Brianna said. She hit play. The audio was crystal clear. It played through the laptop's high-quality speakers, echoing through the silent first-class cabin. "I'm not moving. I have a valid ticket. Scan it." Brianna's voice. "I am not going to argue with a child. Move, now, or I'll have security escort you off." Brenda's voice. Then came the rustling sounds. "Hey, don't touch that. Assault. She attacked me. She just attacked a flight crew member." Brenda's voice shrieking. Raymond paused the recording. He looked at Brenda. "I hear you screaming assault, but the video—" He pointed to the screen. The webcam had captured a wide-angle shot of the ceiling and Brenda's torso. It showed Brenda lunging for the laptop. It showed Brianna pulling back. It showed Brenda stumbling back on her own accord, creating the fake drama. Brianna had never touched her. "You lied," Raymond said. "You fabricated an assault charge to justify restraining a minor." He hit play again. "Get off me. You're hurting me. Sit there. And don't you say a word. Bravo. Finally, some safety on this airline. Good riddance." Eleanor's voice. Raymond closed the laptop. The silence that followed was absolute. The evidence was irrefutable. It wasn't just bad customer service, it was criminal misconduct. 2 uniformed police officers, accompanied by a detective in a trench coat, boarded the plane. The captain, who had been hiding in the cockpit, finally emerged, looking pale and shaken. "What is going on here?" the captain asked, trying to assert control. "Captain," Raymond said, "I'm Raymond Clark. I believe you received the memo regarding the ownership change." The captain swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Good. You're relieved of duty pending a drug test and a review of why you allowed your purser to assault a passenger without intervening," Raymond said dismissively. He turned to the police. "Officers, I'd like to file charges against these two individuals." He pointed to Gary and Brenda. "Charges?" the detective asked, looking at the scene. "For what?" "Assault and battery against a minor. False imprisonment, theft of property valued over $5,000, and filing a false report." Raymond listed them off like he was ordering lunch. "That's ridiculous," Gary shouted. "I was doing my job." "Officers," Raymond said, handing the detective a flash drive he had just plugged into Brianna's laptop. "This drive contains the audio and video evidence of the encounter. It shows unprovoked aggression, physical harm, and a conspiracy to frame the victim." The detective looked at Gary, then at the bruising on Brianna's wrists. He nodded to his officers. "Sir, ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the detective said to Gary and Brenda. "No," Brenda wailed as the officer pulled her out of seat 1A. "You can't arrest me. I'm in the middle of a shift." "You're not in the middle of anything anymore," Raymond said coldly. "You're fired, effective immediately, and don't bother looking for a job in the aviation industry. I'll make sure your file is flagged globally as a security risk." Gary tried to pull away. "This is illegal. You can't just buy the airline and do this." "I can," Raymond said, "and I did." The officers clicked the handcuffs onto Gary. The clicking sound was ironically similar to the zip ties he had used on Brianna just minutes before. "Calmer," Brianna whispered, rubbing her wrists. As the police dragged the sobbing crew members off the plane, Eleanor Higgins stood up. She looked terrified, but she still had her pride. "Well," she huffed, "now that the rabble has been removed, can we get a new crew? We really do need to get to London." Raymond turned his gaze to Eleanor. He had almost forgotten about her. Almost. "You're not going to London, Mrs. Higgins," Raymond said. "Excuse me." "You're deplaning," Raymond said. "In fact, everyone is deplaning. This aircraft is being taken out of service for a full investigation." "But my luggage," Eleanor cried. "My vacation." "Bennett," Raymond signaled his head of security, "escort Mr. and Mrs. Higgins off the plane and ensure they are placed on the no-fly list for Sovereign Airlines and all its partners." "No-fly list?" Robert Higgins choked. "Raymond, we have a home in the south of France. How are we supposed to get there?" "Swim," Raymond suggested. Bennett stepped forward. "Let's go, folks. Move it." As the Higginses were marched off the plane, protesting and threatening lawsuits that they could no longer afford, Brianna looked up at her dad. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain in her shoulder was throbbing. "Dad," she said softly, "everyone is watching." Raymond looked around. The other passengers in first class were staring, wide-eyed. Some were recording on their phones. "Let them watch," Raymond said loud enough for the cabin to hear. "Let them see what happens when you mess with my family." He reached out and gently tucked a stray curl of hair behind Brianna's ear. "Are you okay to walk, sweetheart? Or do you want me to carry you?" Brianna managed a weak smile. "I can walk, but can we take the private jet next time?" Raymond chuckled, a dry sound. "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." They walked off the plane together, leaving behind an empty first-class cabin that still smelled of expensive perfume and fear. But the story wasn't over. The video Brianna's laptop had captured was about to go viral. And while the crew had been arrested, the real fallout, the public reckoning, was just beginning. The ride away from the airport was silent, but it was the silence of a storm that had just broken. Raymond Clark sat in the back of his armored Maybach, his daughter Brianna resting her head on his shoulder. An ice pack retrieved from the car's mini fridge was pressed against her swelling wrist. "Did you mean it?" Brianna asked quietly, looking out at the passing highway lights. "About destroying the Higgins deal?" Raymond took a sip of sparkling water, his eyes fixed on the tablet in his lap, where his legal team was already sending updates. "Brianna, I didn't just mean it. It's already done. The termination letter was sent 3 minutes ago. Higgins' logistics stock has dropped 12% in after-hours trading just on the rumor of the deal falling through." He turned to her, his expression softening. "Money is a tool, Brie. Power is a tool. But family? Family is the only thing that matters. When they hurt you, they declared war on me, and I never lose a war." While the Clarks retreated to their penthouse sanctuary, the world outside was beginning to catch fire. A passenger in seat 3A, a tech blogger named Liam Peterson, had been recording the entire incident on his phone from the moment Raymond walked onto the plane. He hadn't intervened because he was scared, but he knew he held dynamite in his hands. At 9:45 p.m., Liam hit upload on Twitter and TikTok. He titled the video, "CEO Dad Buys Airline to Save Daughter from Racist Crew, Instant Karma." By 10:15 p.m., the video had 10,000 views. By midnight, it had 2 million. The internet did what the internet does best. It became a vigilante mob. The hashtags Flight 409, Fire Brenda, and Boycott Sovereign, until people realized Clark had already cleaned house, began trending globally. But the real damage wasn't just social. It was financial. The fall of Robert Higgins. The next morning, at the headquarters of Higgins Logistics, Robert Higgins walked into his office building. He expected a few whispers. He didn't expect his keycard to be deactivated. He stood at the turnstile tapping the plastic card frantically. The red light blinked. Access denied. There must be a glitch, Robert muttered to the security guard, a man named Frank, whom he had ignored for 5 years. "No glitch, Mr. Higgins," Frank said, not looking up from his monitor. "Board of Directors is meeting in the conference room. They revoked your clearance. You're to wait in the lobby." "The lobby?" Robert sputtered. "I own this company. Not anymore, you don't." 10 minutes later, the general counsel, a sharp-featured woman named Patricia Wells, walked down to the lobby. She didn't offer a handshake. She handed him a thick envelope. "Robert," Patricia said coldly, "the board has voted unanimously to remove you as CEO, effective immediately. The morality clause in your contract is quite specific about conduct detrimental to the company's reputation." "This is about the plane," Robert shouted, drawing stares from the receptionists. "That was my wife, not me." "You were there, Robert," Patricia said, checking her watch, "and the video shows you sitting there, letting it happen. Clark Global has blacklisted us. 3 other major shipping partners pulled out this morning. You have become radioactive. The company cannot survive with your name attached to it." "But my shares," Robert whispered, his knees shaking. "Are plummeting," Patricia said. "We're initiating a clawback of your severance package to cover the damages from the Clark cancellation. You're leaving with nothing, Robert. Security will escort you to your car. Do not go to your office." Robert staggered out of the building, a broken man. He pulled out his phone to call Eleanor, but he saw a notification from his bank. Account frozen, pending litigation. Raymond Clark hadn't just sued him. He had frozen his assets via an emergency injunction. The poverty Raymond had promised was arriving faster than an express shipment. The interrogation. Meanwhile, in the bleak, fluorescent-lit interrogation room of the Precinct 4 station, Brenda sat across from Detective Reynolds. She was still wearing her flight attendant uniform, but it was rumpled, stained with tears and sweat. She had spent the night in a holding cell with a woman arrested for bar fighting. Brenda, who prided herself on being elite, was shaking uncontrollably. "I want to go home," Brenda whimpered. "I have a union rep coming." Detective Reynolds, a man with tired eyes and zero patience for bigotry, tossed a file onto the metal table. "Your union rep called. They're not coming." Brenda froze. "What?" "The flight attendants' union released a statement an hour ago," Reynolds said, opening the file. "They are condemning your actions. They said they don't defend members who commit felonies or violate civil rights." "You're on your own, Brenda." "I didn't commit a felony," Brenda shrieked. "I just moved a passenger." "You filed a false police report claiming assault," Reynolds corrected her. "That's a felony. You physically restrained a minor without cause. That's battery and false imprisonment. And we have the laptop data, Brenda. We know you lied about the ticket." Reynolds leaned in. "But here is the kicker. Mr. Clark's legal team has dug into your history. This isn't the first time, is it? We found 3 complaints from unauthorized expulsions of minority passengers in the last 5 years. You have a pattern. And the district attorney is looking to make an example out of you." Brenda put her head in her hands and sobbed. It wasn't the cry of someone sorry for what they did. It was the cry of someone sorry they got caught. "Gary is in the other room," Reynolds said calmly. "He's cutting a deal. He says you ordered him to tie the girl up. He says you orchestrated the whole thing to please Mrs. Higgins." Brenda's head snapped up. "That lying coward. He enjoyed it. He twisted her arm." "Then I suggest you start talking," Reynolds said, clicking his pen. Because the train is leaving the station and you're currently tied to the tracks. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they are greased by the unlimited resources of a billionaire father scorned, they grind exceedingly fine. 6 months had passed since Flight 409 was grounded by the arrival of Raymond Clark. In that time, the story hadn't just remained a news headline. It had become a cultural touchstone. The image of Brianna's bruised wrists had been plastered across every major news outlet from London to Tokyo. But while the public debated airline policies on Twitter, the real war was being fought in the quiet, mahogany-panelled trenches of the Superior Court. The morning of judgment. On the morning of the sentencing hearing, the sky over the city was a bruised purple, heavy with rain. Inside the Clark penthouse, the mood was somber. Brianna stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blazer. She was 18 now. The softness of childhood had left her face, replaced by a guarded, steely resilience. She traced the faint, pale line on her left wrist, the scar tissue where the zip tie had cut too deep. It was a permanent reminder that no matter how much money her father had, safety was never guaranteed. "You don't have to do this, you know," Raymond said. He was standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked tired. The legal battle had been expensive, not in money. Money was irrelevant, but in energy. "I can have the lawyers read your statement. You can stay here. Watch it on the private feed." Brianna turned, taking the coffee. "No, Dad. They looked me in the eye when they hurt me. I'm going to look them in the eye when they pay for it." Raymond nodded, a swell of pride combating his protective instinct. "The security team is downstairs. The paparazzi are already swarming the courthouse steps. Are you ready?" "I'm ready," Brianna said, though her hand trembled slightly against the ceramic cup. The collapse of the Higgins dynasty. While the Clarks prepared for victory, the Higgins family was waking up to their new reality, a reality that tasted like ash. Robert and Eleanor Higgins were no longer living in their sprawling estate in Greenwich. That property had been liquidated 3 months ago to satisfy a breach of contract lawsuit filed by one of their former partners, a lawsuit quietly encouraged by Clark Global's legal team. They were now renting a cramped 2-bedroom condo in a nondescript suburb in New Jersey. Robert sat at the small kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen. His LinkedIn profile, once boasting the title of CEO, was now a graveyard of ignored messages. He had applied for 17 consulting positions in the last week. He had received 0 callbacks. "Robert," Eleanor called from the bedroom. Her voice, once shrill and commanding, sounded thin and brittle. "The dry cleaner won't release my good coat. They said the credit card was declined again." Robert closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Use the debit card, Eleanor." "I tried," she snapped, walking into the kitchen wearing a bathrobe that had seen better days. "It says insufficient funds. How can we have insufficient funds? We're the Higginses." "We are nobody, Eleanor," Robert exploded, slamming his hand on the table. The cheap laminate rattled. "Don't you get it? Raymond Clark didn't just fire us. He salted the earth. My name is poison in the industry. Every time a background check runs, the first thing that pops up is the deposition video where you admitted to calling his daughter a street urchin." Eleanor flinched. "I was stressed. It was a misunderstanding." "It was the end of our lives," Robert whispered. He spun the laptop around to show her an email notification. "Look at this. The country club just revoked our membership. Violation of moral conduct bylaws. Do you know who sits on that board? Raymond's CFO." Eleanor sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The realization was finally settling in. There would be no more galas, no more first-class flights. They were trapped in the amber of their own arrogance, preserved forever as the villains of a viral story. And the worst part? They had nobody to blame but themselves. The courtroom was packed to capacity. The air smelled of wet wool, floor wax, and high-stakes anxiety. Sketch artists were scribbling furiously in the front row, trying to capture the tension in the room. At the defense table sat Brenda Patterson and Gary Stone. Brenda looked like a ghost. The arrogance she had worn like a uniform on the plane was gone, replaced by a terrified hollowness. She had lost 30 pounds. Her hair, usually dyed a vibrant blonde, was showing inches of grey roots. She kept wringing her hands, staring at the table, refusing to look at the gallery. Gary, on the other hand, looked angry. He was whispering furiously to his court-appointed attorney, a weary man named Thomas Reed, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The bailiff's voice boomed. "All rise. The Honourable Judge Arthur Pendleton presiding." Judge Pendleton swept into the room, his black robes billowing. He was a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for zero tolerance regarding civil rights violations. He took his seat and peered over his spectacles at the packed room. "Be seated," Pendleton commanded. "We are here for the sentencing phase. The defendants have entered guilty pleas to charges of false imprisonment and filing a false police report. We will now hear victim impact statements." The prosecutor, a sharp, formidable woman named Samantha Cole, stood up. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Brianna Clark." A hush fell over the room as Brianna stood up. The sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor echoed like gunshots. She walked to the witness stand, her face composed, her chin high. Brenda Patterson finally looked up. When her eyes met Brianna's, Brenda flinched physically, as if she had been slapped. "Ms. Clark," Samantha Cole said gently, "please tell the court how this incident has affected you." Brianna adjusted the microphone. She took a deep breath, scanning the room. She saw her father in the front row, his jaw set hard. "For the first month," Brianna began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I couldn't sleep without the lights on. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the plastic digging into my wrists. I felt the weight of a grown man shoving me into a seat. I felt the humiliation of being paraded in front of strangers like a criminal." She paused, looking directly at Gary Stone. Gary looked away. "But the physical pain wasn't the worst part," Brianna continued. "The worst part was knowing that I did everything right. I studied hard, I earned my success, I bought a ticket. And none of it mattered. To Mr. Stone and Ms. Patterson, I wasn't a passenger, I wasn't a customer, I was a target. They looked at my skin and my hoodie, and they decided I didn't deserve to be there." She turned her gaze to Brenda. "You stood there and lied, Ms. Patterson. You held my laptop, my life's work, and claimed I stole it. You tried to take my future away because you were annoyed that I existed in your space." Brianna leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. "You wanted to teach me a lesson about my place in the world. Well, I learned a lesson. I learned that my place is wherever I say it is, and no one, not you, not a zip tie, and not a badge, is ever going to move me again." She stepped back from the mic. The courtroom remained silent for a long, heavy moment. Several jurors were wiping their eyes. Even the stenographer had paused, her hands hovering over the keys. The defense flail's Thomas Reed, the defense attorney, stood up wearily. He knew he was fighting a losing battle, but he had to try. "Your Honor," Reed said, buttoning his cheap suit jacket, "my clients are deeply remorseful. They were working under extreme pressure. Flight 409 was delayed, the cabin was chaotic, and they made a split-second judgment call. It was the wrong call, yes. But is prison the answer? Ms. Patterson is a single mother. Mr. Stone has a spotless record prior to this. They have already lost their jobs, their pensions, and their reputations. Surely probation is sufficient punishment." Judge Pendleton listened, his face unreadable. He tapped his pen against the bench. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, his voice dry, "I reviewed the audio evidence from Ms. Clark's laptop. I heard the split-second judgment. It lasted 11 minutes. That is not a split second. That is a sustained assault. I heard Ms. Patterson mocking the victim. I heard Mr. Stone laughing while he restrained a minor. That is not pressure. That is malice." The judge turned his gaze to the defendants. "Brenda Patterson, please stand." Brenda stood up, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the table. "You were the senior crew member," Judge Pendleton said. "You set the tone. You had a duty of care to every passenger, regardless of their age or attire. Instead, you acted as a bully. You weaponized the police against a child to cover up your own bias." Brenda began to sob. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm so sorry." "I believe you are sorry now," the judge said, "but a badge and a uniform are a trust. You broke that trust." He looked down at his paperwork. "Brenda Patterson, I sentence you to 36 months in the state correctional facility. You will not be eligible for parole for 24 months. A gasp ripped through the room. Brenda's knees buckled, and she collapsed back into her chair, wailing. 3 years. Her life as she knew it was over. "Gary Stone, please stand." Gary stood, his face pale. "You provided the muscle," the judge said with disdain. "You enjoyed the violence. I sentence you to 24 months in state prison." The gavel banged down with a sound like a thunderclap. "Bailiffs, take them into custody." As the officers moved in, clicking the handcuffs onto Brenda's wrists, cold, metal, unforgiving handcuffs, she looked frantically toward the gallery. She locked eyes with Brianna one last time. There was no defiance left, only a pleading, pathetic desperation. Brianna didn't look away. She didn't smile, she just watched. It was the cold, clinical observation of a balance sheet finally being zeroed out. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The air felt clean, washed new. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward like spears. Mr. Clark, are you happy with the verdict?" "Brianna, how do you feel?" Raymond shielded his daughter, guiding her toward the waiting SUV. But before they got in, Brianna stopped. She turned to the cameras. "I'm not happy," Brianna said, her voice caught by dozens of microphones. "Happiness would be having a flight where I was just a girl going on vacation. This isn't happiness. This is accountability. And I hope every company out there is watching. Because if you come for us, we won't just sit there. We will stand up." She ducked into the car, and the door slammed shut on the flashing bulbs. 1 year later, the summit. The darkness of the courtroom felt a lifetime away. The setting was the Moscone Center in San Francisco. The lights were dazzling, shifting hues of electric blue and violet. A crowd of 3,000 tech enthusiasts, investors, and journalists sat in hushed anticipation. On the massive screen behind the stage, a single word pulsed in white light. Aura. Raymond Clark sat in the front row, reserved VIP seating. Next to him sat the former captain of Flight 409, a man named Captain Anderson. Anderson had been cleared of wrongdoing after the investigation proved he had been misled by his crew, but he had retired from flying. He now worked as the chief safety officer for Clark Global. They remained close, bonded by the trauma and the cleanup. "She's nervous," Anderson whispered. "No," Raymond smiled, adjusting his tie. "She's ready." Music swelled, a deep, bass-heavy synth track. The stage lights converged on the center. Brianna Clark walked out. She looked powerful. She wore a tailored black turtleneck and dark jeans, her hair braided back in intricate, regal rows. She wore no jewelry except for a simple smartwatch on her left wrist. The applause was deafening. It rolled over the stage like a physical wave. Brianna waited for the noise to die down. She looked out at the sea of faces. 2 years ago, she began, her voice amplified and confident, I was told I didn't belong in a seat I paid for. I was told my technology, the prototype in my bag, was stolen because someone like me couldn't possibly have created it. A murmur of recognition went through the crowd. They knew the story. That day, I lost my faith in the system, Brianna said. But I found something else. I found a flaw in the way we protect our digital lives. We rely on passwords. We rely on trust. But trust is easily broken. She clicked a remote. The screen behind her changed to show a sleek, matte black smartphone interface. Introducing Aura Identity, Brianna announced, the world's first biodynamic encryption platform. It doesn't just scan your fingerprint. It learns your heartbeat. It recognizes the unique cadence of your typing. It knows you. She paused, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. And it has a special feature I like to call the witness mode. If the device detects a forced struggle or rapid deceleration, it instantly uploads all camera and audio feeds to a secure, immutable cloud server. It creates a record that cannot be deleted, cannot be altered, and cannot be ignored. The crowd erupted. They understood the subtext. She had turned her trauma into a feature. She had monetized her own survival. We are giving the power back to the user, Brianna shouted over the applause, because in this world, your truth is the most valuable thing you own. Protect it. As the presentation ended and confetti rained down from the ceiling, Raymond stood up, clapping until his hands stung. He watched his daughter, the CEO, the innovator, the survivor. Far away, in a gray prison cell in upstate New York, Brenda Patterson sat on a thin mattress. A small television mounted in the corner of the common room was playing the news. She saw the clip. She saw Brianna, glowing under the stage lights, the headline reading, "Teen Tech Prodigy Launches Billion-Dollar Startup." Brenda looked down at her own hands, rough from prison labor laundry duty. She looked at the grey walls. She looked at the life she had earned. She turned the TV off, but the silence that followed was louder than any applause. It was the silence of regret, heavy and eternal. Brianna Clark had not just survived Flight 409, she had soared above it. And as she looked out at the standing ovation, she knew that the view from here was better than first class. It was freedom. This story serves as a powerful reminder that prejudice isn't just cruel. It's a dangerous gamble. Brenda and the Higgins family bet their careers on the assumption that Brianna was powerless, only to find out she held the keys to their destruction. It proves that true strength isn't about being loud or aggressive, it's about having the receipts, the intelligence, and the resilience to turn a tragedy into a triumph. Brianna didn't just win a lawsuit, she built an empire on the very ground they tried to bury her in. If you felt the satisfaction of justice being served in this story, please smash that like button. It helps us bring you more dramatic stories of karma and redemption. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next upload. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone underestimated you? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you next time.